Welcome, and thank you for joining us in this new conversation within the framework of the Defending Democracy Global Initiative. I'm Jabir Deralla, here with Roger Casale, and together we'll be exploring the pressing challenges facing democracy and freedom today, from political backsliding to war, to resistance, resilience, and recovery. This week we turn to Rome, where the Ukraine Recovery Conference 2025 took place, and it brought global attention back to Ukraine, not just as a battlefield, but as a nation rebuilding against all odds. With the 11 billion euros pledged, major institutional and private commitments and new security frameworks emerging. What does that all really mean for Ukraine's future and for Europe's, for that matter? Let's take a closer look. Roger, you were at a significant event hosted by the British ambassador to Italy, joined by a number of dignitaries and international partners. Could you share some impressions of that gathering? What was the atmosphere, and what did it signal in the broader context of the conference? Shall we begin with this question, maybe?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jabir. Well, as you can imagine, it was a beautiful summer evening in the wonderful gardens of Villa Folgonski, which is the British ambassador's residence in Rome. And the tables were set on the lawn with beautiful canapes and wine, and people were eagerly coming into the garden, down the steps, as you say, from all over the world, including from Ukraine, the Deputy Economic Minister, the Mayor of Lviv, and many people representing different aspects of life in Ukraine, business and civil society included. And despite that beautiful environment, we were all very much aware that what was happening as we gathered in Kyiv was that the bombs and the drones were dropping the bombs, and they were raining down over Kyiv. And I was very struck by one of the first conversations I had with Valeria, who was a mechanical engineer from Kyiv, who was there with a delegation from her company looking for investment for reconstruction projects in Kyiv. And she said, I said, what does it feel like being here in this beautiful space, this garden tonight? And she said, it's wonderful to be in this lovely setting. But the thing that's really struck me is when I look up, I see planes flying overhead. I can't remember the last time I saw planes flying overhead, because, of course, the skies are safe over Rome, but they're not safe over Ukraine. And so I think there was very much a feeling of solidarity with Ukraine and a determination to do something practical that can really be helpful in the circumstances, and a reaffirmation of a long-term commitment to Ukraine. The British ambassador said, we will be there for as long as it takes. And that's good to hear, but we also need to know, we don't know how long it will take, but we need to find out what actually needs to be done to achieve a sustainable long-term peace in Ukraine. And that's really why people were gathered there. And I think it was actually, a very strong sense of solidarity, but very focused on the task at hand, at the practical things, going beyond the words and the feeling of solidarity, important as those are, to the practical work that needs to be done to support Ukraine for the long term.
Yes, being a British MP yourself, former British MP yourself, you've probably met some British members of Parliament at this gathering, and maybe some other dignitaries. Did you have any conversation that could be shared here exclusively for our audiences?
Yes, I did have conversations with British MPs. I mean, the British MP that we know very well, who is a supporter of Westminster Alliance for Ukraine, was co-hosting the event, Alex Sobel. And he always says to me how important it is that we focus on the issue of Russian assets in the work that we're doing with the network that we've been creating, the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine. As the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said, we've got to move from seizing Russian assets from freezing Russian assets to seizing Russian assets. And as President Zelensky subsequently said at the conference itself the next day, we do need to go beyond using the profits from Russian assets to actually using the Russian assets themselves. So I think that was one very important conversation. Another conversation I had was with the chairman of the Italian Foreign Affairs Committee in the Chamber of Deputies, and he was at the reception, and he's from Udine in the northeast of Italy near Trieste. And which we talked about, and I'll come back to that in a second. He's called Emanuele Loperfido, and he was very interested to hear about Westminster Alliance for Ukraine and to offer his support for the work that we're doing and to be part of our network. And he also invited me to Udine and to Trieste, again, to focus on the long-term practical work that needs to be done to support Ukraine, because Trieste could be a very important point of entry port. And then obviously there's, traditionally, historically it was the sort of port of Central Europe, access point for supplying Ukraine and for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And the preparations that are being made there already are something he was keen for me to see. So it was a very worthwhile event from the point of view of networking with the kinds of people that we are looking to get in touch with and put in touch with each other as we build our caucus of MPs across the E5, Poland, France, Germany, Italy, and the UK, as part of our Westminster Alliance for Ukraine.
That's all extraordinarily important, and thank you for sharing these details that are usually not in the press, but are very important for the audiences to understand the context and to understand the process, how it all goes. And it's not always easy, as we all know. If we look at the conference itself, what struck you most about this year's Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome? Not just in terms of numbers, which are staggering, indeed staggering, but in terms of its political tone and maybe the symbolic weight as such.
Well, I think the political tone was very positive. It was very good to have both the President of Ukraine and the First Lady there, who, by the way, spoke extremely well and made a great impact, emphasizing not just the damage to the physical and infrastructure and the economy of Ukraine, but also the need to rebuild people. If we rebuild the people, we will rebuild the country. She was talking about the trauma, the emotional costs, the strain, the stress, and of course the terrible injuries that so many of the Ukrainian men and women at the front line have sustained, and the program to rehabilitate them, and what's happening with schools in the health service. And what struck me was, yes, I've talked about the long-term commitment, I've talked about the solidarity, but I think there was also a sense at this conference of the new Ukraine that will emerge from the conflict. And, there's been a lot of talk about the Marshall Plan. Perhaps we'll talk about the economics of this in a moment and whether the comparison with the Marshall Plan is a valid one, but you get the idea. But I think one should also remember that, for example, from the UK point of view, the post-war settlement after the Second World War was very much something that was visioned and worked on during the war. And I think it's important to make this point to your viewers, that the new Ukraine that will emerge from the conflict is being thought about now, is emerging now. And I think that runs very much parallel with the accession process, because there are objective criteria, reforms, and so on that need to occur, that will characterize and that are occurring. And that work is being done now. So it's not just about defending Ukraine. It's also about allowing the new Ukraine to emerge. Ukraine is already stronger and will emerge stronger. And we will see a new Ukraine after the conflict. And I hope we will see a new Europe as well. Because I think there was also that sense in which the future of Europe is really the future of Ukraine. It's and the other way around. The future of Ukraine is the future of Europe. We cannot really separate those two things. And I think that focuses the mind. And so it was a moment that brought us close to Ukraine, the solidarity of Ukraine, but also a moment where you felt that Europe is coming together.
This feels really important. Everything that you just assessed about the conference, it's both urgency and optimism at the same time. But I know that you're a skeptic yourself, despite being a great optimist and a fighter for these questions and issues and causes. But are we hearing only bold speeches right now, or we're witnessing genuine commitment? Just a brief impression of yours. I mean, we don't need necessarily to be entirely correct, but what's your feeling? Personally, I felt quite invigorated, so to speak.
Well, you say I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic from a kind of philosophical point of view. I'm not a Eurosceptic. I'm a great believer in Europe and supporter of it.
That's out of question, of course.
But just to be clear about that. But I think, yes, it's right to take a good look at what was actually said and what is actually promised and what is actually going to be done. I mean, I think one person, I think it was the First Lady, who said, quoted a line from Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, and said, "You have to run just to stand still." And I think that summed up very well for me my overwhelming feeling about the conference. It was very good that people were active and they weren't walking, they were running, but overall you felt like we were running just to stand still. I mean, if we weren't running, we might be moving backwards, and we don't want that to happen. But it wasn't a great sense in which we are making any significant breakthroughs here. I mean, but I think we can turn that around as well. I don't think we should be pessimistic. I think we should be clear that Russia is not only not achieving its objectives, its political objectives in the war, but there's no prospect of it achieving its political objectives in the war in the foreseeable future. And of course, it's occupied a lot of Ukrainian territory. It's terrorizing the Ukrainian people with its actions, raining down bombs on civilians and on infrastructure. But it's not getting any closer to achieving its political objectives. I think that there should be no doubt at all, following the publication of the European Court of Human Rights report into Russia's actions, which was brought also by the government of the Netherlands because of the fact that it was a Russian missile that brought down the MH17 plane. And that's just been published recently. But the extraordinary extent of Russia's human rights abuses, the torturing of men, the way that they're tortured to deprive them of their sense of manhood, the systematic use of rape to humiliate women and whole populations, and the confiscation of children, taking Ukrainian children back to Ukraine, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we should be under no illusions about what we're dealing with here in relation to the Russian regime. And of course, one thing that was is important, it was good news, is that the Americans president will use the presidential drawdown to release funds so that more air defense systems and those defense systems are already in place in Europe can be released. But that's good news in the short term. But we need that translate into long term support and long term commitment. And the special envoy to President's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, gave me what was a very mixed message to the conference. And saying in German, in reply to the German Chancellor, "Wir sind here, we are here with you." But at the same time saying, don't expect us to, do everything for you, and gave this very sort of curious presentation, or made this very curious reference to the sort of global governance structure. I think what he meant was the entire post-war international system, which did such a good job for decades in producing peace, stability, and prosperity in Europe, which is exactly what we want for Ukraine. Sort of portraying it as if it was the villain, and that we don't want to have any of this sort of global institutions involved. We've got to leave it to the people of Ukraine. Well, I'm a great one for empowering the people of Ukraine and starting with the people of Ukraine, but this is a massive undertaking. The fact that you had 6,000 people at the Ukraine Recovery Conference from 70 countries just goes to show you how broad this coalition is, how complicated this is. And indeed, people made reference to the Marshall Plan. But the point about the Marshall Plan is that we had international institutions where people could actually sit around a table and discuss things together and make rational decisions. And they could be pretty sure that once they'd made agreements, that that everybody would keep to that. And my fear today, Jabir, is that we don't have that anymore. It's not just that the Americans are stepping back, although they've taken 2 steps back and at the Ukraine conference, 1 step forward again. So that's good that they've taken the 1 step forward again. But let's remember that before that, they took 2 steps back. Not just a question of military support and investment economic support. It's also a question of being people who we can work with, people who we can actually sit down at the table with, and so that the international community, including the American government, have the capacity to deal with the scale of the crisis and the challenge that we face. And I must say, I do have some skepticism about that.
Yes, indeed. And from what you were talking about Ukraine and its recovery and its resilience and resistance and so on, it all sounds. I mean, I don't want to sound like an advertisement now, but it all sounds very, very close to your idea of the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine. That is a program, a complex program that is derived, recently launched in May in the UK Parliament, led by you and Mr. Alex Sobel. And also is something that somehow comes out as if the organizers and hosts were reading the recommendations in the Defending Democracy and Human Rights report and policy recommendations. You know, the book that is behind you and me, and I also have it here. But that's why where we have these recommendations that are so doable, so actionable, and the hesitation by some political powers globally, particularly the United States, and some within the European Union and the Europe's continent as such, sounds a little bit threatening. Sounds a bit discouraging, but altogether, from what I hear from you about the conference, about the gathering at the UK ambassador's event, and from our very, very frequent activities and conversations we have about Ukraine's chances for victory and furthermore recovery, sound very encouraging, very strengthening at the same time. Let's hope together that all this will go into the positive direction. And in that context, I would like to ask you, about the pledge that was made at the conference. like 11 billion euros in commitments sound very promising. Uh, but do you have a recommendations here, a recommendation here, or maybe a vision how to move from high level pledges to tangible long term impact for communities on the ground? Do you have something to share with the audiences, and of course with decision makers that will probably see this video?
Yes, I do, and thank you for the question. And what I would like to share is that I think there is quite a mobilization going on. You mentioned when we launched the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine on the 13th of May in London at the House of Commons. We have very much a focus on building a network of MPs. Earlier in this conversation, we talked about America stepping back from its leadership role. So that leaves a vacuum. And you do need leadership if we're going to support Ukraine. And that's what the conference was about. That's what was happening there. But I don't mean leadership in the sense of telling people what to do. I mean leadership in terms of formulating a strategy and how that can be implemented. And I think my point to your audience is, to our audience, is we all have a role to play in that. It's not, we've identified in the Westminster Alliance as a priority the need for MPs to get behind the idea that Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron and others had to have a coalition of willing to support Ukraine economically and militarily in terms of its security going forward, and that MPs could come together to support that. But what I saw at the Ukraine Recovery Conference was not just MPs, we've talked about them, but also businesses and also civil society and also local governments and regional governments. We all have a part to play in stepping into this leadership vacuum, because leadership is about teamwork. Leadership is about doing things together. So let me give you a very practical example of how this can work. There needs to be a joined up approach between government and business and civil society and stakeholders in Ukraine. To be able to deal with the challenges that we face at the moment, because one of the big challenges was getting grain out of Ukraine, shipping it out of Ukraine when there wasn't a possibility to use the Black Sea port. And of course, now it's not that the Russian fleet has been destroyed, but systems have been put in place to allow for the ships to come in and out of Ukraine. And one of the problems was energy, and because the energy supply had been destroyed. And so huge floating batteries were created and placed there on ships that could power up the port, because they themselves were vulnerable to attack. And very, very, very costly, $200 million. So then the question is insurance. Who's going to insure that? And for a long time, it was very difficult to find any insurance. I spoke to somebody at the conference who was the former chair of Lloyd's of London. And what I need to get across to your viewers is, it's not that, I mean, obviously a huge, we're talking about $500 million at a conservative estimate in terms of the total reconstruction for costs over 10 years in Ukraine. And I'm sure that the next time that we have the Ukraine Recovery Conference, because as you know, these take place every year, that bill will have gone up. It's not that there's a shortage of companies, major companies, serious companies wanting to invest and step up to the mark. They see also the opportunity. There'll be opportunities to invest in the new Ukraine and to invest profitably, and that's a good thing. And there'll be all kinds of things that we can learn from Ukraine, that Ukraine knows about. Its expertise now in drones, in security, and so on, are all things that Europe can learn from. So that I think there can be full of businesses see that potential. But the difficulty is, if you invest now in Ukraine and then something happens, it's a very high risk. How do you ensure your investment? And there, I met people from the trade export department of the British government, the Department for Trade, who give guarantees for exports, but also for investment, and as well as the people I met from the insurance industry. So there really is a sense in which people are coming together to say, what needs to be done to allow businesses to do what they want to do, which is to start investing, to step up, let's put it this way, their investment in Ukraine. And a lot of that is to do with working together. It's to do with teamwork. And I think we also need to understand what the needs are from Ukraine. And that's about listening to local people. And I think that's why it was very good that the mayor of Lviv was there, and that a lot of work is being done at the level of the Committee of the Regions from the European Union, for example, in other areas to build partnerships with local authorities and local governments and regions. And so no contribution to the reconstruction of Ukraine is too small. Obviously, not everybody who might have wanted to be at the conference could be there for the whole conference, but everybody's contribution is welcome.
Sounds absolutely practical, doable, and very reasonable, logical in the end. And I hope that this will take place in the way that this conference, including other events, let's be open to other events that are ongoing or will be organized in the future. And I hope I'm not wrong if I say that this sounds like a turning point in how reconstruction is financed and who drives it. And so maybe these thoughts that you just shared will become part of the new trends of how reconstruction of war-torn or societies are being helped with. And in that context, with if I remember well, 186 Ukrainian communities presenting over 300 or about 300 local projects. Are we looking into a decentralized recovery? To call it that way, maybe becoming one of the Ukraine's greatest strengths, and maybe this is becoming a potential model of democratic rebuilding more broadly for other countries in the world that are in a similar situation.
Yes, Jimmy, I think that's very well said. I think that the model for the reconstruction of Ukraine will be one that is very decentralized, to maximize local and regional accountability so that it's not all top down. That's one aspect, but also because, as the First Lady said, Olena Zelenska, that if we rebuild the people, to empower the people, we will rebuild Ukraine. So I think the reconstruction of Ukraine will also be the reinvention of Ukraine. And it will bring Ukraine much closer into Europe, possibly into membership of the European Union. And I believe that the reinvention of Ukraine is also an opportunity to reinvent Europe, because it's not as if it's only in Ukraine where democratic renewal is needed. We have a democracy action plan in the European Union that is woefully out of date following the COVID crisis and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the events and the attacks on European democracy subsequently. And scarcely anybody knows about it. And it needs to be completely rewritten. And we had before that, we had the conference on the future of Europe, which was a one-off event that has not been built or not been really followed up. Some of the ideas that people brought to the Conference of Europe were followed up, but the idea of working more closely with making the European project truly a Europe of the citizen and renewing our democracy in the European Union is a job that needs to be done. And I think it's right to say that the future of Ukraine is the future of Europe. The reinvention of Ukraine is an opportunity to bring about the reinvention of Europe. And I want to see not just a democratic Ukraine, free, peaceful, stable, prosperous, sustainable Ukraine, a free Ukraine, Slava Ukraine. I also want to see a free and democratic, deeply democratic Europe at a time when it sees very values that are under threat, not just in Ukraine, not just in Europe, but all over the world.
That's wonderfully put, indeed. Thank you for those words. Let's move towards the defense issues, the defense aspects. the announcement of the multinational force Ukraine. Is it a symbolic reassurance or just first step towards a new kind of European security architecture, maybe? How do you see it?
Well, I see more as the second thing that you said. It's a step in the right direction. I think, again, your viewers will be surprised or some of them will know, but some of them won't know, how lacking in military capacity the European Union actually is. I mean, more or less, with the exception of France and Britain, which of course are famously not a member of the European Union, but part of the security architecture, there's not very much in the way of deployable capacity. And the EU member states have agreed to increase most of them, and also the UK, outside the European Union, the UK, to step up their military expenditure. But that is going to be easier said than done. And we need to get MPs and the public behind that. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but there's a long way to go. And if we can't mobilize support for the first step in the right direction, we risk falling back and traveling very rapidly in the wrong direction.
I agree with that, and it's good to have the first step. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any direction, indeed. But we also need to stress the fact that we might not have the time that the societies, and especially political and decision-making elites, think they need to in order to make this happen. So maybe it's good to stress the fact that we are running out of time. We don't know what is currently happening in the corridors and in the war rooms of the Kremlin and of other hostile powers across the globe. So maybe building this architecture, security and defense architecture of Europe should be accelerated before it's too late and before we suffer more casualties.
Well, I agree, it does need to be accelerated. I'd be cautious about saying we're running out of time, although I understand that sentiment very well and that feeling. And a lot of us have it. I have it too. I think, though, in terms of the argument that we make politically, it's important not to sort of give people the feeling that we're trying to scare them into getting their consensus, because people want the money spent on other things too. And none of us know the future. I think we have to work with what we do know. And what we do know is that Russia is not achieving its political objectives in the war. We do know that the cost to Russia has been over 1 million casualties, 1 million people dead. We do know that the Russians have perpetrated on a massive scale human rights abuses, the ones that we've talked about earlier on this in this podcast. And we do know that despite talk of a ceasefire and kind words from time to time to President Trump, that nothing of the kind has materialized or is likely to materialize. And so this is likely to be a long, drawn-out contest, conflict, violent conflict. The conflict would continue for decades, even after the violence stops. And I think our job is absolutely to help Ukraine to defend itself and make sure that it can continue to defend itself, and not only defend itself in its front line, but to protect its civilians and its infrastructure from these terrorist attacks that are so brutal and so devastating. Not to get worn down, to keep the morale high, but to put the defense mechanisms in place. But also, and this is the point about European defense, to say, do we want to take the risk of thinking that Russia is not a threat to the European Union itself and other places in the European Union? You know, just a few days ago, a drone landed in Lithuania by mistake, presumably. But, you know, Putin has a habit of sort of provoking things to see what happens. And I don't think we should sort of make sense of I'm trying to scare your audience into thinking that the Russians are about to Europe, because we don't have evidence of that at the moment. We don't know that that's what Russia will want to do. But I think we do know enough about Russia to say, as well as supporting Ukraine, we need to be in a much better position to defend ourselves were such a possibility to occur. We cannot be complacent about a regime like Putin's. We have to put ourselves in a position where we can defend ourselves from attack if we need to, because we cannot rule it out tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. What I am saying is, if it were to happen, we are not prepared, and I would prefer us to be prepared. I don't know whether we're running out of time. We will find that out. We will find out whether Putin wants to invade. We will find out whether we're better prepared. What we do know is that we have to do everything we possibly can, in my view, to be better prepared, and we need to start now.
Totally agree with that, and of course, when I say we are running out of time, without intention to change my thoughts and positions, but certainly we have certain signals from the Kremlin that his first stop is not Ukraine, and it's not the last stop either. That regime can only survive through violence and through terror and through crimes against humanity and genocidal politics. In that sense, I would appeal to the decision-making structures, as well as to civil society, media, and others that are shaping the everyday democratic reality in Europe, that they should not waste time on fruitless and futile conversations, endless debates, and just how to say, appease these terror regimes. We need to be effective, decisive, and look towards the future in a more practical, more logical, and more secure way. Now, of course, just as a complimentary comment to what you just said, and was really wonderfully put, I have to say. Finally, Roger, if I may, what does Ukraine's recovery effort tell us about the state of democracy and solidarity in Europe today? And where are we still falling short, or are we on a great way? Let's just summarize this wonderful conversation about what the future of Europe with Ukraine in it tells you if you look into it. And of course, as you said, we can't know the future, but what's your feeling? Can you tell us, what do you think about the Ukraine's recovery effort and about Europe's solidarity, the state of Europe's solidarity now?
Well, what I see, thank you for the question. What I see in Europe is, I think people can understand and feel for the suffering of the Ukrainian people under these constant nightly attacks. And I think many Europeans will go beyond that and will recognize the extraordinary resilience of the Ukrainian people, and that President Zelensky is truly a hero, and the whole Ukrainian people for standing up to the aggressor and to Russia. At the same time, people are they like their lives in the way they are. It's summertime. We were in the garden at the ambassador's residence with the beautiful blue skies and the glass of prosecco and the canapes. People like their aperitivo. They like their time on the beach. They're also concerned if they're lucky enough to be able to do that, and many of them are. Europe is much more prosperous, but there's also a lot of people who can't do that. A lot of people who are left behind. A lot of people who are working and yet are poor because of inflation and the cost of living, because of the threat to their jobs, because they don't have proper employment protection. So I think that people do feel the pain of Ukraine, they do recognize the heroism and the resilience of the Ukrainian people. They do recognize the responsibility, but I think we need to go well beyond that. And I think that's why it's so important that we, I don't like the phrase bring people with you. I've never been in favor of that. I don't think you can bring people with you. I think people have minds of their own and they'll make those up themselves. But I do think we need to engage more with the public, we in civil society, those of us who are active in politics and also in business and so on. Because I think people have got to get beyond just feeling the pain of Ukrainian people and showing solidarity, which they do, but to really understand that it's not an either-or scenario. It's not either give money for the defense of Ukraine and Europe or look after our interests. Those two, you cannot separate those two things. That a defeat if we lose in Ukraine, we lose in Europe. And life for all of us in Europe will get so much worse. All of those very real daily problems that people experience in their lives today, to do with access to healthcare perhaps, might be on a waiting list for an operation that's taking too long, or to get the kind of school they want for their children, or to get the pay rise that doesn't come, or to get the employment opportunity that doesn't occur. All of the things that we are grappling with as citizens of Europe in our daily lives will get so much worse if we lose the battle for Ukraine. And so I think we need to recognize and get the message across and show that in a very practical way, that the future of Ukraine is the future of Europe. And it's not just a question of solidarity, important though that is. We must get behind our governments. Don't just leave it to the governments. Must get behind and recognise our own responsibility as citizens to engage and support the effort to support the recovery programme and the defence of Ukraine. And there was talk of the conference about a new Marshall Plan. I don't think that's a valid comparison, although it helps to focus the mind. But I think we are at a moment where it becomes not just about the future of Ukraine, it becomes about the future of Europe, about our future. But we need to get that message across to the public and engage them and see what that means for members of the public. Do they understand that? What have they got to say about it? And if they don't like it, what needs to change so that we truly can build a vision for the future, collaboration and support for Ukraine that everybody has at stake in. Ursula von der Leyen said, we are literally becoming stakeholders in the future of Ukraine. But I don't know if that is got through to every kitchen table in every household in Europe yet, or whether that's how people feel. And that's the point we need to get to, where all of us can feel that we are stakeholders in the future of Ukraine, and not just our political leaders standing up and saying that, important though that is. Well done to her for saying it. But there's a long way to go until that really beds down with European publics. And unless that happens, it will be very difficult to deliver on the Ukraine recovery programme.
Roger, I think that these messages are going to get across and reach many audiences, and will reach the minds of people who might help this to happen. Say not only about the recovery conference in Rome, not Ukraine's Ukraine recovery conference in Rome, but also about the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine ideas, plans, and future activities and steps, and about defending democracy and human rights, not only in Ukraine, but in Europe and globally as well. But we will certainly be smart if we say, okay, let's stop here and let this portion of our minds reach our audience and leave a little bit for the next episode that we will meet in our podcast. I was really delighted to meet you here today, and thank you for your great thoughts and for sharing all these exclusive information about your experiences and your contacts.
Thank you, Jabir, for the opportunity to speak to your audience.